when my wife does have sex, she screams. Ooh, especially when I walk in on her. Now, you kid, I know my wife cheats on me. Every time I come home, the parrot says, quick, out the window, you know? My house, I can't relax. Really? I got a dog. He drives me nuts. I got a dumb dog. You know, we call him Egypt. Every room he leaves a pyramid. My kids, they don't help either.
No good, huh?
No, my kids, they're real smart kids I got, you know. Yeah. But the other day I told my kid, I said, someday you'll have children of your own. He said, so will you.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, July the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we'll have No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, Fox News, Senator Tim Scott, Newsmax, Just the News, and the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The process of discovery begins when we observe, often vaguely, a gap between what is and what could be. Our intuition tells us something better is just beyond the range of our mind's eye. To build a culture of discovery, we must encourage, not discourage, the passionate pursuit of hunches, no matter their origin. Charles G. Koch. This inquisitive component of human nature is God created, and out of this process comes miraculous things. Human observation transcends that of the animals, who may very well observe basic empirical realities but lack the soulful capacity for bridging the gap between what is and what could be. Humans were given not just this ability, but this burden, this opportunity, this cultural mandate.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that culture trumps politics. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He does not go looking for trouble. He is alert. He curbs his curiosity, and he acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He is judgmental and moralizes. He refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why, rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that being a true conservative is best, or you are wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households. Integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a tweet from Tim Scott, Senator Tim Scott. The U.S. Supreme Court was right to end the illegal and immoral effort by the Biden administration to transfer student debt to taxpayers. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. Colleges now need to look in the mirror and be held accountable for how expensive college has become. The closest thing to magic in America is a good education, and if colleges and universities price themselves out of reach for too many Americans, we won't be able to sustain the American dream. If they don't act to lower tuition and improve the quality of their programs, when I'm president, I will. Additionally, we must strengthen vocational education and apprenticeships. Today, elite universities are not the only path to prosperity. In America, you can go as high as your character, your grit, and your talent will take you. That means whether you go to Harvard, Charleston, Southern University, or whether you want to be a plumber, welder, or electrician, you too can experience your version of the American dream. These are the jobs that built America, and these are the jobs liberal elites can't ship to China. College isn't the only path to the American dream, and it's time for a president who values hard work and the American people who do it. Joe Biden won't, but I will. And that was Senator Tim Scott on Twitter. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a report on California's plan for reparations by Fox News.
California's proposed reparations plan now entering a crucial phase. The task force has released its final recommendation. The report now goes to the state legislature for consideration. Let's bring in civil rights attorney Leo Terrell, also a Fox News contributor. Leo, thanks for joining us this morning. I want to get right to the recommendations here. This is from the California report saying, quote, the African-American story in the United States is marked by repeated failed promises to right the wrongs of the past, both distant and recent, and racism that perpetuated these harms. Leo, what's your take?
The reparation recommendation, Rich, is dead on arrival. Let me be very clear. They make reference to the United States. We're talking about California, Rich. California never had slavery at all. You look at the composition of California politicians right now, black mayor in San Francisco, black mayor in LA. You got people of color. They can't prove harm. They can't prove damages that existed 175 years ago. Rich, two other points. One, this committee needs to get a copy of the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. And in California, they passed Prop 209, which makes it illegal to give preferential treatment. Why would non-blacks pay for any type of reparations for people who cannot show any harm arising from slavery?
The report cites health disparities, pollution, housing restrictions, aggressive policing, mass incarceration, the war on drugs. How does California, how does its legislator, how does its government, how does any government address that?
They're not going to, Rich. I want to be very clear. What you just read off, that list, that has nothing to do with slavery. Over policing today has something to do with what happened 180 years ago. Let me be very clear. The whole purpose of the reparation committee was to keep black voters within the Democratic Party. It was a olive branch. It came out of the summer of 2020. It's not going to work because it's never going to pass. Let me sit here and say this. As a black American in this country, I'm not a victim of slavery, and I would be the first lawyer at the courthouse to fight against such passage of any type of monetary compensation. It will not pass, Rich.
And that was Fox News with guest Leo Terrell about reparations in California. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
This is Audible.
The Rape of the Mind by joost-meerlo. Narrated by Chris Matthews. The Rape of the Mind. The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing. By joost-meerlo, MD. The Rape of the Mind. Since 1933, when a completely drugged and trial-conditioned human wreck confessed to having started the Reichstag fire in Berlin, Dr. Joost-meerlo has studied the methods by which systematic mental pressure brings people to abject submission, and by which totalitarians imprint their subjective truth on their victims' minds. It is Dr. Meerlo's position that through pressure on the weak points in men's makeup, totalitarian methods can turn anyone into a traitor. And in The Rape of the Mind, he goes far beyond the direct military implications of mental torture to describing how our own culture unobtrusively shows symptoms of pressurizing people's minds. He presents a systematic analysis of the methods of brainwashing and mental torture and coercion, and shows how totalitarian strategy, with its use of mass psychology, leads to systemized rape of the mind. He describes a new age of Cold War with its mental terror, verbocracy, and semantic fog, the use of fear as a tool of mass submission, and the problem of treason and loyalty, so loaded with dangerous confusion. As John Dollard wrote in the New York Times, Dr. Meerlo is a passionate spokesman for the democratic practice of life as a general human goal, not merely as a device for beating off the totalitarians. Every thinking American should take some of his self-time, his time for self-development, and read this book. Dr. Meerlo shows in his own person what psychoanalysis can do when it is freely combined with social science knowledge. He is a remarkably developed individual man. Indeed, he is one of the great spokesmen of the democratic world, and everyone should know him. Dr. Joost-Meerlo's best-known work, The Rape of the Mind, is written for the interested layman, not only for experts and scientists. The first 2.5 years of World War II, Dr. Meerlo spent under the pressure of Nazi-occupied Holland, witnessing at first hand the Nazi methods of mental torture on more than one occasion. During this time, he was able to use his psychiatric and psychoanalytic knowledge to treat some of the victims. Then, after personal experiences with enforced interrogation, he escaped from a Nazi prison and certain death to England, where he was able, as chief of the psychological department of the Netherlands forces, to observe and study coercive methods officially. In this capacity, he had to investigate not only traitors and collaborators, but also those members of the resistance who had gone through the utmost of mental pressure. Later, as High Commissioner for Welfare, he came in closer contact with those who had gone through physical and mental torture. After the war, he came to the United States, where his war experiences would not permit him to concentrate solely on his psychiatric practice, but compelled him to go beyond purely medical aspects to the social aspects of the problem. As more and more cases of thought control, brainwashing, and mental coercion were disclosed, Cardinal Mazzenti, Colonel Schwabel, Robert Vogler, and others, his interest grew. It was Dr. Meerlo who coined the word menticide, the killing of the spirit, for this particular crime. His knowledge of these totalitarian procedures has been officially acknowledged. He served as an expert witness in the case of Colonel Schwabel, the Marine Corps officer who, after months of subjection to physical and mental torture following his capture in Korea, was made to confess to having taken part in germ warfare.
And that was The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a clip from Newsmax about Hunter Biden.
Newly revealed pictures from global energy expert Hunter Biden's laptop show the multi-millionaire drug-addicted, unregistered foreign agent driving a Porsche 911 Turbo 172 miles per hour just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. There's also another new photo out now of Hunter smoking crack while driving a car in Arlington, Virginia. Something most people don't do. Hunter's rock star life, collecting checks for his father by day, drug-fueled orgies by night. But we have long maintained that this is not a Hunter Biden story, and that's why we don't spend a lot of time talking about Hunter Biden, because that's what the other side uses as a distraction. They say it's all about Hunter. It's not. This is a Joe Biden story, and Hunter, never facing consequences for his actions, has been critical to protecting his father, Joe Biden. You'll notice the Biden family is really embracing Hunter lately. He had that great appearance at the state dinner for India's prime minister, and then back-to-back weekends with Dad at Camp David. Oh, to be a fly on the wall. Joe needs to make sure his son is happy, free of legal troubles, and feeling all the love right now. While we all wonder just how much control the Chinese and other foreign actors bought over Joe Biden for all of those millions and millions of dollars, just think about how much leverage Hunter has over the sitting American president. Hunter, this guy right here, could bring down this entire regime with what he knows. It explains so much of what we're seeing right now. Nice picture. Starting with Merrick Garland and the fake prosecution of Hunter Biden in the state of Delaware by David Weiss. Here is Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, a little over a year ago. Very careful with his words in front of Congress. And in hindsight, what he says here in this moment tells you everything that you need to know.
The U.S. Attorney in Delaware has been advised that he has full authority to make those kind of referrals that you're talking about, or to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. And I will assure that if he does, he will be able to do that.
So you notice the wording there, talking about Weiss. David Weiss has the right to make referrals for charges in other jurisdictions. He can make a lot of referrals. He's allowed to do that. Now, those referrals will be blown off, as we've seen, but he could refer as much as he wanted. That's how Merrick Garland got around what so obviously was the obstruction of this investigation. It came from the top. And Weiss did refer. He referred in D.C. and California, an entire cabal pretending to operate by the book is what this was. A fake 5-year investigation. It never ended. It was never real, and it would never end. In the end, Biden's political cloud in Delaware and D.C. shut down an inquiry that started with his son and was on its way to exposing a major political scandal, probably the biggest one we've ever seen in the country. Whistleblower Gary Shapley's testimony paints a picture of investigators who were scared of the ramifications of actually doing their job. Quote, the FBI case agent in Delaware had only recently moved back to his hometown of Wilmington with his wife and family and was concerned about the consequences for him and his family if they conducted these sensitive interviews and executed a search warrant of the President Biden guest house. Of course, that's Hunter's room. Everybody knew in Delaware, it's a small state, don't mess with the Bidens in Delaware, in that tiny, very corporate state. The Shapley testimony already revealed one of David Weiss's assistants, Leslie Wolf, was fully in the bag for Team Biden, refusing to see any evidence that pointed toward wrongdoing or corruption by Joe Biden. She refused to see all the evidence clearly pointing to the biggest D.C. corruption story on record. And now we're learning there was a second assistant U.S. attorney in this investigation, Derek Hines, compromised as well. Hines once worked with Hunter Biden business partner Louis Freeh. So you're investigating Hunter and possibly presidential corruption, and you've worked in the past with one of Hunter Biden's business partners, probably in a less than, not a very good operation, I'm sure. How much evidence do we really need here? How terrifying is it that it's so simple to rig the system for the right people here and so easy to weaponize it against the wrong ones? And even more dangerous to this country than Joe Biden's obvious corruption is the fact that he was so unafraid to behave this way. It is a rot that must be removed immediately that's enabling this kind of activity. Republicans now demanding interviews with 11 different DOJ officials, including Trump-appointed David Weiss, who they love pointing out was Trump-appointed, who clearly went through the motions of a 5-year investigation to keep up appearances that our elites cannot blatantly sell out our country for profit when it's becoming very clear that they can and that they do. Just look at the evidence the DOJ clearly ignored. Millions of dollars from the Chinese government, money paid and favors owed to shady, corrupt people in many different countries, including the Chinese. That's what's becoming very evident here about the man that's sitting in the White House right now. And knowing that, imagine what else establishment Washington has been concealing.
And that was Newsmax about Hunter Biden and really President Joe Biden. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a tweet from an organization called Just the News.
I wanted to ask you about Merrick Garland and the testimony that he gave to Congress. I remember vividly a moment where he said that there was no difference in treatment between Republicans and Democrats, rich and poor, powerful, powerless. I mean, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg of what I think were some pretty significant falsehoods. Do you think that House Republicans should impeach him?
Well, they certainly ought to hold impeachment hearings on him, Secretary Mayorkas, Secretary Blinken, who lied before my committee investigators by saying that he never emailed Hunter Biden, and we have the emails that he did email. I think those types of hearings would be extremely informative. But before you hold those hearings, you need to gather as much information as possible, as much documentation. You need to hear from as many whistleblowers as possible. Or these guys are really practiced at lying. We've witnessed that. They have no problem lying in Congress, in front of the American public. So you've got to be able to catch them in their lies. So you need a lot of evidence before you hold those hearings. But I think those hearings would be very instructive.
Yeah, and just real quickly, Blinken is so important, and you're the first person you really focused on him. He's the guy that all countries have to trust on our foreign policy, but he hasn't been trustworthy with the American people. Is he hurting foreign policy? We've got about 20 seconds left.
Well, President Biden's foreign policy has been a disaster. Anthony Blinken for the heart of it. He's the guy, by the way, that prompted that letter from the 51 former intelligence officials.
Yeah, that's right.
He needs to be impeached.
And that was Just the News with an item about impeachment. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Fox News with Larry Elder.
But you call yourself a make America great kind of guy. Donald Trump at this point, at least polling wise, is lapping people. So what's the strategy? How can you even come close to taking on Donald Trump, let alone getting more votes than he?
I'm not taking on Donald Trump, Jason. I'm taking on Biden-Harris. As you pointed out in that poll, the number one objective is to make sure we win in November 2024. And if Donald Trump is the nominee, I will campaign for him and with him as I've done in the past, and will do so if asked to do so again. I'll do everything I can to make sure whoever it is we nominate beats Biden-Harris. Again, but I'm a Make America Great Again candidate too, America First candidate too. Plus, I bring the issues to bear that I just now mentioned, and I'm urging people to go to my website, LarryElder.com, and throw something in the tip jar. Get me up there on that debate stage. I need 40,000 individual donations in order to make that. At the very least, even if you want another candidate, if I put these issues front and center, Jason, I will feel I've done a service to my party and, more importantly, a service for my country.
And that was Larry Elder, a guest on Fox News. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Newsmax with a segment called News from the Left.
Time now for news from the left, and boy, do we have a good one to start with. There's no way of knowing how it got there or whose it is, but it appears that cocaine has been found at the White House. And it wouldn't be a thumping July 4th weekend without Hunter Biden ripping lines off of a bust of Teddy Roosevelt. A mysterious white powder was discovered in the West Wing on Sunday, prompting a hazardous materials call to the fire department. I wish I was making this up, but it's true. Newsmax can confirm the powder is presumed by the fire department to be cocaine. It was sent to a lab for further analysis. Hunter, I can tell you, was at the White House on Friday, leaving with his father for Camp David. Sadly, he may have forgotten his party favors, which is unfortunate. Imagine having to hang out with Joe Biden for 4 days sober. Now, that's a long weekend. Next up, AOC melting down over the Supreme Court's busy last week.
These are the types of rulings that signal a dangerous creep towards authoritarianism. If Chief Justice Roberts will not come before Congress for an investigation voluntarily, I believe that we should be considering subpoenas. We should be considering investigations. There also must be impeachment on the table.
So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thinks the Supreme Court is so authoritarian that we should remove them and install a court that does everything that she wants. I don't think she sees any problem with that. Former ESPN personality Jemele Hill is not taking the SCOTUS affirmative action ruling well either. An Asian American immigrant named Yatin Chu celebrated the ruling on Twitter, writing, "I told my daughter today is a big day. They've ended affirmative action. Isn't that what you've been fighting for?" she asked. And I said, yes. Well, that got Jemele very angry, writing, "Can't wait until she reads that you gladly carried the water for white supremacy and stabbed the folks in the back whose people fought for Asian American rights in America." So now we're on the whole white supremacy thing. You know, the people that got harmed the most by affirmative action were Asian Americans who just got gutted in the application process at schools and jobs, etc. They were being phased out, much like white people in this country have been phased out over the last 40 years. Up next, former Biden mouthpiece Jen Psaki has a curious new theory, saying the GOP is recruiting an army of Muslim Americans to attack the trans community.
Hear me out here. The GOP is trying to recruit Muslim Americans, a community that makes up less than 2% of the U.S. population, against another tiny marginalized group of Americans, transgender people.
It's a really stupid show if you haven't seen it yet. Or maybe, Jen, they just don't want their kids hypersexualized in school. It doesn't really fly well in Muslim households, you know, talking about, you know, sexual stuff and all sorts of perversions when they're like 6 years old. people generally don't like that, especially religious people. Could be that. One of two theories. Jen has one, I have another. All right, and finally, the mainstream papers have been hilarious on the Hunter Joe scandal, and the New York Times, of course, will do anything to protect the Biden family, even on Hunter's deadbeat dad story. You know, the one with the daughter, with the stripper that he so wishes would just disappear. The Times writing, seen through one prism, the photos are a powerful public testament of love from a mother to her daughter. Seen through another, they are exploitative, certainly from the perspective of Biden allies who fear the images and the child are being weaponized against the Biden family. Talking about pictures of the little girl that Hunter does not want, the little girl that the White House refuses to acknowledge exists. So covering the fact that the President of the United States has an extra grandchild that he doesn't acknowledge apparently is a bad thing, and that's exploitative against the White House. We're supposed to just act like that doesn't happen in the New York Times perfect universe of how we should be treating a Democrat in the White House versus a Republican. So I guess conservative media are the bad guys for informing the public of just the kind of people that we have in the White House right now with a bag of cocaine found over the weekend. If you ask Joe Biden how many grandkids he has, he will say 6. And evidently staff at the White House have been instructed to always say 6. Joe Biden has 7 grandchildren. One is a very adorable little girl who is very inconvenient.
And that was Rob Schmidt with News from the Left on Newsmax. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, President Barack Obama awards Captain William Swenson of the U.S. Army the Medal of Honor.
Let us pray together. Eternal God, who has been our helper in times past, continue to be our help in these days. For more than 2 centuries, you have blessed our nation with dedicated and selfless soldiers in uniform who stand ready to deploy and defend our nation's freedoms. As we honor Captain Will Swenson for his actions during the Battle of Jean Gigal, we honor the sacred trust that he and his team embodied that day. We thank you for the last full measure of devotion given that day. The Medal of Honor is draped around Captain Swenson. May the healing grace of hope and peace rest upon each of us. Captain Swenson's example rekindle in us a spirit of sacrifice and a steadfastness of purpose. May this occasion renew our commitment to uphold the right, to oppose the wrong, and continue to work that has begun so long ago. As we ask and pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Good afternoon, everybody. Please have a seat. On behalf of Michelle and myself, welcome to the White House. Now, last month, the United States Army released a remarkable piece of video. It's from the combat helmet cameras of a medevac helicopter crew in Afghanistan. And it's shaky and it's grainy, but it takes us to the front lines that our troops face every single day. And it's useful to remember that there's still a whole lot of our troops in Afghanistan in harm's way. In that video, as the helicopter touches down by a remote village, you see out of a cloud of dust an American soldier. He's without his helmet, standing in the open, exposing himself to enemy fire, standing watch over a severely wounded soldier. He helps carry that wounded soldier to the helicopter and places him inside. And then, amidst the whipping wind and the deafening roar of the helicopter blades, he does something unexpected. He leans in and kisses the wounded soldier on the head. A simple act of compassion and loyalty to a brother in arms. And as the door closes and the helicopter takes off, he turns and goes back the way he came, back into the heat of battle. You know, in our nation's history, we have presented our highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor, nearly 3,500 times for actions above and beyond the call of duty. But this may be the first time that we can actually bear witness to a small fraction of those actions for ourselves. And today we honor the American in that video, the soldier who went back in, Captain William Swenson. Not far away that day was then Corporal Dakota Meyer, to whom we presented the Medal of Honor 2 years ago. Today is only the second time in nearly half a century that the Medal of Honor has been awarded to two survivors of the same battle. Dakota is not here today, but I wanted to welcome some of the soldiers and Marines who fought alongside both these men and the families of those who gave their lives that day. I want to welcome all of our distinguished guests, including members of the Medal of Honor Society, whose ranks today grow by one more. Most of all, I want to welcome Will's wonderful parents, Julia and Carl, and Will's girlfriend, Kelsey. I had a chance to visit with them. Both Carl and Julia are former college professors, so instead of a house full of G.I. Joes, Will grew up in Seattle surrounded by educational games. I'm told that even when Will was little, his mom was always a stickler for grammar, always making sure he said to whom instead of to who. So I'm going to be very careful today. I just had a chance to spend some time with him, and I have to say Will is a pretty low-key guy. His idea of a good time isn't a big ceremony like this one. He'd rather be somewhere up in the mountains or on a trail surrounded by cedar trees instead of cameras. But I think our nation needs this ceremony today. In moments like this, Americans like Will remind us of what our country can be at its best. A nation of citizens who look out for one another, who meet our obligations to one another, not just when it's easy, but also when it's hard. Maybe especially when it's hard. Now, Will, you're an example to everyone in this city and to our whole country of the professionalism and patriotism that we should strive for, whether we wear uniform or not. Not just on particular occasions, but all the time. For those who aren't familiar with the story of the battle that led Will to be here today, I want to take you back to that September morning 4 years ago. It's around sunrise. A column of Afghan soldiers and their American advisors are winding their way up a narrow trail towards a village to meet with elders. But just as the first soldier reaches the outskirts of the village, all hell breaks loose. Almost instantly, 4 Americans, 3 Marines, 1 Navy, at the front of the column are surrounded. Will and the soldiers in the center of the column are pinned down. Rocket-propelled grenades, mortar, machine gun fire, all of this is pouring in from 3 sides. As he returns fire, Will calls for air support, but his initial requests are denied. Will and his team are too close to the village. And then Will learns that his non-commissioned officer, Sergeant First Class Kenneth Westbrook, has been shot in the neck. So Will breaks across 50 meters of open space, bullets biting all around. Lying on his back, he presses a bandage to Kenneth's wounds with one hand and calls for a medevac with the other, trying to keep his buddy calm. By this time, the enemy has gotten even closer, just 20 or 30 meters away, and over the radio, they're demanding the Americans to surrender. So Will stops treating Kenneth long enough to respond by lobbing a grenade. And finally, after more than an hour and a half of fighting, air support arrives. Will directs them to nearby targets. Then it's time to move, so exposing himself again to enemy fire, Will helps carry Kenneth the length of more than 2 football fields, down steep terraces, to that helicopter. And then, in the moment captured by those cameras, Will leans in to say goodbye. But more Americans and more Afghans are still out there, so Will does something incredible. He jumps behind the wheel of an unarmored Ford Ranger pickup truck. A Marine gets in the passenger seat, and they drive that truck, as a vehicle designed for the highway, straight into the battle. Twice they pick up injured Afghan soldiers, bullets whizzing past them, slamming into the pickup truck. Twice they bring them back. When the truck gives out, they grab a Humvee, The Marine by Will's side has no idea how they survived, but he says by that time it didn't matter. We weren't going to leave any soldiers behind. Finally, a helicopter spots those 4 missing Americans hours after they were trapped in the open ambush. So Will gets in another Humvee with a crew that includes Dakota Meyer. And together they drive past enemy fighters, up through the valley, exposed once more. And when they reach the village, Will jumps out, drawing even more fire, dodging even more bullets. But they reach those Americans, lying where they fell. Will and the others carry them out one by one. They bring their fallen brothers home. Now, Scripture tells us, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Captain Will Swenson was a leader on that September morning. But like all great leaders, he was also a servant to the men he commanded, to the more than a dozen Afghans and Americans whose lives he saved, to the families of those who gave their last full measure of devotion on that faraway field. As one of his fellow soldiers later said, Will did things that nobody else would ever do, and he did it for his guys and for everybody on the ground to get them out. And that's why after I called Will to tell him he'd be receiving this medal, one of the first things he did was to invite to this ceremony those who fought alongside him. And I'd like all of those who served with such valor alongside Will, both Army and Marines, who fought for each other, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Will also reached out to the families of the 4 Americans who gave their lives that day. To them he wrote, and I'm quoting Will now, "We have never met, we have never spoken, but I would like to believe that I know something about each of you through the actions of your loved ones on that day. They were part of a team, and you are now part of that team. So I would ask the members of this team, the families of First Lieutenant Michael Johnson, Gunnery Sergeant Edwin Johnson, Gunnery Sergeant Aaron Kennefick, and Hospitalman 3rd Class James Layton, as well as the family of Kenneth Westbrook, to please stand. Kenneth was the soldier Will delivered to the safety of that helicopter. And after being airlifted out, he made it to Walter Reed. He started rehab and spent time with his wife, Charlene, who joins us here today. She still remembers the first time she spoke to Will when he called from Afghanistan to check in on Kenneth. Soon after that phone call, however, Kenneth took a turn for the worse. He succumbed to complications from his treatment. But I think it's fair to say that Charlene will always be grateful for the final day she was able to spend with her husband. And even now, a month rarely goes by when Will doesn't call or text checking in with Charlene and her 3 boys. That's the kind of man he is, Charlene says about Will. You don't have to ask Will for help. He just knows when to be there for you. So Will Swenson was there for his brothers. He was there for their families. As a nation, we thank God that patriots like him are there for us all. So, Will, God bless you and all the men that you fought alongside and everything that you've done for us. God bless all our men and women in uniform, and God bless the United States of America. With that, I'd like my military to read the citation, please.
The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Captain William D. Swenson, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Captain William D. Swenson distinguished himself by acts of gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as embedded advisor to the Afghan National Border Police, Task Force Phoenix, Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan in support of 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division during combat operations against an armed enemy in Kunar Province, Afghanistan on September 8, 2009. On that morning, more than 60 well-armed, well-positioned enemy fighters ambushed Captain Swenson's combat team as it moved on foot into the village of Ganjgal for a meeting with village elders. As the enemy unleashed a barrage of rocket-propelled grenade, mortar, and machine gun fire, Captain Swenson immediately returned fire and coordinated and directed the response of his Afghan border police while simultaneously calling in suppressive artillery fire and aviation support. After the enemy effectively flanked coalition forces, Captain Swenson repeatedly called for smoke to cover the withdrawal of the forward elements. Surrounded on three sides by enemy forces inflicting effective and accurate fire, Captain Swenson coordinated air assets, indirect fire support, and medical evacuation helicopter support to allow for the evacuation of the wounded. Captain Swenson ignored enemy radio transmissions demanding surrender and maneuvered uncovered to render medical aid to a wounded fellow soldier. Captain Swenson stopped administering aid long enough to throw a grenade at approaching enemy forces before assisting with moving the soldier for air evacuation. With complete disregard for his own safety, Captain Swenson unhesitatingly led a team in an unarmored vehicle into the kill zone, exposing himself to enemy fire on at least 2 occasions to recover the wounded and search for 4 missing comrades. After using aviation support to mark locations of fallen and wounded comrades, it became clear that ground recovery of the fallen was required due to heavy enemy fire on helicopter landing zones. Captain Swenson's team returned to the kill zone another time in a Humvee. Captain Swenson voluntarily exited the vehicle, exposing himself to enemy fire to locate and recover 3 fallen Marines and 1 fallen Navy corpsman. His exceptional leadership and stout resistance against the enemy during 6 hours of continuous fighting rallied his teammates and effectively disrupted the enemy's assault. Captain William D. Swenson's extraordinary heroism and selflessness above and beyond the call of duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, Task Force Phoenix, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division, and the United States Army.
And that was President Barack Obama awarding the Medal of Honor to U.S. Army Captain William Swenson. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.